This episode is brought to you by Chefs Making Waves. Destination, New England. A 4-day food, wine, and spirits festival at sea. Presented by Sixthman, EBG, and A21. Sailing October 24th to 28th, 2025, from Boston to Portland, Maine, and St. John, New Brunswick, this unforgettable voyage brings fall flavors, picturesque ports, and world-class culinary experiences to the high seas with celebrity chefs, including Alex Gurnishelli, Alton Brown, Eric Ajapong, and Andrew Zimmern, for ship-exclusive curated dinners, cooking demonstrations, culinary conversations, and more. Plus, a premium beverage package is included. Reserve your cabin now at boston.chefsmakingwaves.com and taste the best of New England at sea.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Heritage Radio Network is supported by Visit Ithaca, where great minds meet the great outdoors. Check them out at visitithaca.com. Ithaca is known for outstanding dining. And here's a word from one of those great local businesses.
My name is Kukwa Jibodi Yomepe, and the name of the restaurant is Asempe Kitchen. I started out at the farmer's market, and the reception we received was so overwhelming that I thought it made sense to stay in the area. My goal so far has been to create some space for everybody who feels disenfranchised or feels like they're not represented to come together and have a place to be. So we have been working really hard to be more than just a restaurant. So like a place to just rest, get some really good food, and maybe some good conversation. We have community tables, and I kept the communal tables because of the way I feel about building community. The food is mostly vegetarian. It's from West Africa, mostly from Ghana. I'm originally from Ghana, West Africa. I've been in the U.S. about 30 years. On Sundays, we do a brunch, and during brunch, we offer meat as an option to folks who eat meat. I'm very much a purist when it comes to the food. I like to offer people the authentic, stuff.
To plan your next trip or to find out more information, go to visitithaca.com.
Wherever you go, whatever they get into, from chill time to everyday adventures, protect your dog from parasites with Credelio Quattro. For full safety information, side effects, and warnings, visit CredeliaQuattroLabel.com. Consult your vet or call 1-888-545-5973. Ask your vet for Credelio Quattro and visit quattrodog.com.
I'm Peter Reinhardt, and welcome to Pizza Quest. A quest is a quest is a quest, and today's show focuses on a quest running parallel to our usual topic of pizza, but with equal fervor. Today, it's all about rye bread, Jewish rye bread in particular. Our guests, Steve Katz and Donna Webber, told me that they met in graduate school while studying history at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the fall of 1976. While they may have recognized a shared appreciation for Jewish foods and cooking and baking, it was Donna who had already baked a perfect Linzer torte. Yet Steve and Donna would have been surprised if someone told them then, just wait, and in 49 years, you will be collaborating on the subject of Jewish rye bread and being interviewed by Peter Reinhardt on Pizza Quest. So 49 years later, here we are. Steve, who is not a professional cook, but is a deeply serious cooking and baking enthusiast and a noted recipe developer and published recipe developer, as we'll learn later, has a vision for the Jewish rye bread he was working to produce starting back in the late fall of 2023. We'll describe that in a minute. Donna Webber was the first person that Steve thought of to gain her thinking and constructive feedback in his Jewish rye bread quest. That is because he knew that Donna grew up in authentic Jewish rye bread baking and eating communities in New York and then Montreal, and saw similar historical and cultural connections through food that have been steadily disappearing. As Steve says, Donna knows from corn rye, shissel rye, and much more. Donna's own Jewish family life and cooking continued to evolve as Donna became the culinary matriarch of her own family, editing and digitizing more than 90 pages of recipes for her mother and from her mother's earlier generations. Donna also knows from history because she's a professor and a professional archivist, worked at Radcliffe College at Harvard, at MIT, Harvard Medical School, and was the college archivist and then faculty at Simmons College in Boston. I could go on and on about these two, and we'll learn more about their individual and collaborative journeys as we go. But let me first say, welcome, Steve and Donna, and let's dive into this beautiful loaf of rye bread, of Jewish rye bread that I've got in front of me, which Steve calls Katz Rye Has Soul. That's the name of this loaf. And we're going to discuss what you were shooting for when you made it. Donna and Steve, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. It's an honor.
Well, look, let me first start by asking, what makes this Jewish rye? Is it different from other kinds of rye?
It is different. Donna, you want to start and explain that, and then I'll chime in.
Well, I think the recipe is derived from Jewish rye bread recipes. So in a very technical sense, it's a Jewish rye. It is also certainly the kind of rye bread that Jewish communities developed and sold in the communities I lived in, New York and Montreal, and in many ways still do. But I have to say that beyond being an excellent rye bread that come out of those traditions, it is also a more well-developed bread and the best rye bread I ever ate in my life.
Oh, that's high praise.
You're too kind.
But and this is really something that Steve you developed it out of your taste memories, your food memories of what you recall as childhood. I know there's many communities with that have Jewish bakeries in them, and probably as many different versions of rye bread of Jewish rye as there are of these bakeries. But so your taste memories go back to your childhood in Chicago. Donna, right. You grew up you both in where was it, New York or Boston
New York and Montreal.
And Montreal, where there's large communities, lots of bakeries. So this rye bread that we were referring to today as Jewish rye bread comes from a rye bread tradition that's German, Polish, Russian. There's lots of rye breads out there. Can you give us a little bit? You're both basically food historians. You start out meeting, way back 49 years ago, just because of your shared interest in food anthropology and things like that.
Well, no, we were in grad school together, and I think we became friends. And we didn't really. I wasn't into cooking at the time, but Donna was. Donna. Her Linzer tort, absolutely memorable. Got me through a deep winter in Madison when I was writing my master's thesis on a much less interesting subject, but albeit on immigration history. Let me talk about the bread for a second in conjunction with your questions for Donna. Yes, it's true that given my background in doing food writing and recipe development over the last 30 years, I think, I got into the habit of researching the history of different recipes. Not always. My first recipe that was published, I made for my wife, Leslie, and I at the time after work. It was a quick seared strip steak recipe. Mm-hmm. She brought home an ad for the National Beef Cook-Off in Country Living magazine. My recipe matched one of the criteria. I sent it in, and I got a phone call that said I was a semifinalist. I had to be in Hagerstown, Maryland at the Maryland Cattlemen's Convention to cook off.
Were you living in Washington at the time?
Yeah, and I was working.
So that was close.
For Senator John Glenn as one of his counsels, and I had to go to our committee clerk to ask permission because it was on a day when the Senate was in session, and her name was Mickey Prosser, and Mickey looked at me and said in her Missouri accent, Steve, I grew up on a cattle farm in Missouri. You better win this thing, you know?
And did you?
Well, it was a little tricky. It was a lot of fun. Huge, kind of small conference in the sense farmers and vets and producers and so they picked four different semifinalists, but each of us had given a recipe in a different category. So you couldn't really win, you know.
Right.
Mine was fast, flavorful beef. Somebody else's was beef for entertaining. We all got livestock ribbons that night at the dinner. And I sent it in to Bon Appetit saying, I learned a lot. They said, well, we'll skip the story. We'd like to publish the recipe.
Nice.
And at the end of the year, it was named to their best recipes of the year collection.
Well, we should probably, if we have time, we should go back and talk about how you do that, or at least tell people how they may be able to get that recipe. But
I didn't know that I had a sensibility, and I grew up in the meatpacking industry in Chicago and so on and so forth. But what I did with the Jewish rye is that I was exploring it for cultural and identity reasons. It was something that I thought was, pretty intimidating sounding, actually, particularly, for those who have tried it. It's not easy. And as I told Donna the other night, recreating a recipe for Jewish rye bread today, because it's still in some communities, but not really in the same form.
yeah,
This has been more like Jurassic Park than the Great Jewish Bake Off, Peter.
how so?
I really mean that, because you have to go back and find out, well, where did this come from? So the short answer is Amy Emberling, the distinguished, rye queen of Zingerman.
At Zingerman's Bakehouse, in Michigan.
God, she's interested in history and writing, and she's written great blog posts where she talks about rye growing with wheat in the fields, producing something equivalent to what's referred to as maslin, which more ardent bakers know is this blend of wheat and other cereals, right?
Right.
And that was one interest. And then because of having grown up in the food industry and always knowing that when I was writing and interviewing chefs and producers, there was always a much bigger food chain behind everything. I knew where the meat came from. That I grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
I just applied it thinking, well, okay, all this other stuff came from somewhere too. Frankly, it's much more complicated in your world. I just listened to the wonderful 2020 podcast you did with Nikki Justo from Central Milling.
Uh-huh.
And my God, I mean, he grew up in a family business, and his knowledge enables him to navigate so much and be successful. But he works with bakers and farmers and the mills and, runs them. And he does it because he knows the whole food chain.
Right.
And I know some of that, So what
because not all wheat is equal. There's different kinds of wheat. There's different kinds of rye. And
right. And I buy my rye flour from him for the bread.
Uh-huh.
It comes from North Dakota. I buy there's a more refined, what's called a white rye I buy from Janie's Mill in Southern Illinois that I use specifically for the rye sour.
So this bread, this particular loaf has two different kinds of rye flour in it.
Yes, it has two different kinds of rye flour in it and a very specific rye sour recipe. But what I learned in doing the research, and I got somewhat lucky, though I think the skills Donna and I developed, and I think we're both kind of ardent researchers and we document things. And I mean, I have more charts from this bread from month to month to month to year to year to year and so forth, that somebody asks me a question, I can tell them what the hydration levels, what the percentages of the flours are and everything, that's how you do it. But the most important thing I was interested in is, well, in looking at what happened to the culture of production of rye bread that enabled all these bakeries and delis that we grew up with, where was that coming from? And I happened upon a book called The Rye Dictionary.
Hmm.
Rye Dictionary was published by General Mills through its Gold Medal Flours division, and the purpose was to sell rye flour. And it's a 4.5 by 5.5 inch volume. It's 99 pages. It was originally published in 1936 and then reissued in 1948.
Wow.
Not only does it, like, for example, on page 25, Rye Bread Productions Do's and Don'ts. This is one of the most important sentences. Rye doughs seem to give better results if developed by natural hydration rather than high-speed agitation. That led me to research other historical recipes, like in the International Jewish Cookbook from 1919, places like that. And what I found was that they all took 4 to 6 hours to develop just the dough before it proofed or anything.
So in fact, let me see if I can translate what you just said. So what you're saying is it's better to let all the ingredients sit and hydrate together and with gentle handling and not high speed mixing. For whatever reason, it produces a better
Almost
loaf.
no mixing.
So does that say something about the delicacy of the rye itself to be able to form a dough?
There's a lot of details that first of all, you've discussed some of this in your videos from Johnson and Wales on rye flour and stuff. It's too complicated to go into briefly. However,
but it rang something rang true for you when you heard that.
I could read through this book, which I read through again this morning just to make sure I remembered stuff.
That's cool.
And that was one of the things that leapt out. The other thing Donna and I have in common is we both like reading cookbooks. Now, reading cookbooks is important because not everything translates, and in fact, George Greenstein in his Secrets of a Jewish Bakery, on like deep into the middle of the book when he's writing about corn rye, which Donna can explain.
Let's put a pin in that and come back to that, Donna. We would come back to corn rye.
Yeah, and she grew up with it and I didn't. But let me just tell you, he says he's like deep in the middle of the book and he says, this is the best rye I make and I could write an entire chapter about it. But he didn't. So you had to read through the recipe and his brief narrative.
Interesting.
And I'd never even heard of corn. I didn't know. Donna, you want to explain?
Yeah, let's go because I met George Greenstein 25 years ago. He's passed since. This book, the Secrets of a Jewish Baker, is a very important book that came out in the midst of the sort of bread renaissance in the United States in the early 2000s or late 1990s or whatever. But it's been out now for 20 plus years, and it made an impact. And rye bread, which is not nearly as common as wheat bread, never goes away, and it always keeps having these comebacks. Right now, we're I think in a renaissance of rye breads again. So what? And the first thing he talked about when I heard him speak was his corn rye. So Donna, can you explain what a corn rye is?
I can tell you the very little I know because Steve always thinks I know more than I do. But corn is in many European countries, it's a general word for grain, and it usually actually refers to wheat, not to anything specific like rye. The original wheat that I remember reading about was einkorn, and the other one was emmer, and these were both native to the Middle East, the Fertile Crescent. And I think that word kind of hung on. So if you get to the modern era, and you're talking about the famous corn laws in England, for example, in the 19th century, it's wheat.
Yeah.
It's not corn is American more so.
And in German bread names like Vollkornbrot, corn is in there, but it's not referring to corn as we think of it as it's maize.
Grain.
Not maize, it's grain. So corn can be any kind of grain. Usually it can be wheat or rye, but it's not corn as we know it.
Right.
And so corn rye does not
have anything
corn.
But corn.
So everybody, when they heard corn rye, they started getting out their cornmeal and figuring out how am I going to put this into my bread.
Right.
But I think because he uses what they used to call first clear flour, in that recipe, which was another thing I had to figure out,
Yeah.
um, which I'm still not sure I understand, but I found something that I can use instead of whatever somebody else might call it. I was able to actually speak to the folks at Central Milling to figure out from their standpoint what it was, both in extraction, protein, different things like that. So I do use some, in addition to the rye bread, in addition to bread flour. So this is just one point I want to make. What you learn from reading Amy's article and then reading recipes, and then when you get into the rye dictionary,
Uh,
the formulas. Well, first of all, they have 7 pages just on sours alone.
and this is back in 1940s, the 40s and 50s,
Yeah, 30s and 40s.
before most Americans knew anything about how to do sourdough breads.
Yeah, I mean, and they weren't calling it sourdough. They were just calling it rye sour, and they pointed out that the rye sours are better if it's all rye, which other people echo later, but they were talking about it then. So when you read their recipes, I mean, the difference is the other thing that I have in my background is somehow I got into working with chefs and converting restaurant recipes to home cooking recipes,
Oh,
right?
that's a pretty cool little side gig.
Right. So a lot of my, separate from the cowboy steaks in a skillet and, and my Christmas Chateaubriand that was in Gourmet Magazine, I don't even ask me how, but I wound up getting to know all these chefs. And next thing I know, can you be in the restaurant, on the day after Christmas to work with me on spring duck, Yeah.
It's cool because I'm sure it was a wonderful break for you being sort of up on Capitol Hill dealing with policy issues and things like that, and legal matters, to be able to do something that you were passionate about that goes all the way back to your youth, to your childhood, growing up
Well,
in a food
family.
supported family. Yeah.
Well, not only that, although my mom had stopped doing this by the time we were older, she learned to cook as an adult. And in the 60s, our company, which was a wholesale meatpacking company, mainly to hotels and restaurants,
Mm-hmm.
my dad launched a mail order division using the same steaks, the same prime steaks they were selling to great restaurants, right? And he had an idea of a marketing scheme where you would offer a cookbook of menus of recipes from all these chefs. And he got the chefs to give the recipes, and not just for the main course. They were everything from a Madeira sauce to a French dressing to a rice pudding, but obviously to whatever the entree was. And they came from, we sold to Galatoire's in New Orleans and Antoine's and many in Chicago and elsewhere. So the cookbook, which was called Meals to Remember, was actually not initially a cookbook. It was menus that were designed of 3 to 4 course meals. And my mom figured out how to convert all those recipes for home use. Now, she didn't really talk about it, or I was too young anyway. My daughter, Nina, recently wrote an article about it. But I just think you grow up, and Donna, correct me if I'm wrong, you grow up with your mom or dad doing stuff, and you realize it's doable when you get to that stage in life, where you're going to tackle that recipe. You've done
But let me ask you something. You mentioned your dad collaborating with all these chefs. Did you ever get to personally benefit from that? Did you get to eat at a lot of these restaurants as part of your,
Well,
palate development?
Well, first of all, I was spoiled, Peter. My family, which was a business called Stockyards Packing Company of Chicago, was probably the finest purveyor in the city for 50 years. And even Arnie Morton, when he finally decided to open up his steakhouses, he bought exclusively from
So
us.
your family was at the center of the finest quality foods.
When my parents would go out for dinner on Saturday night and look in on the dining room and the kids were sitting there eating, my dad always said, "You're eating better than I will."
Nice, nice.
Because he, they'd made a London broil or a roast or steaks or veal chop, who knows?
Yeah,
But trust me, after my family left the business, I mean, I never bought retail. So, I knew from good meat. And I think Donna was the one who told me, Steve, all these early articles you
yeah,
wrote,
yeah.
weren't you really trying to chronicle and document the food history you grew up with?
There you go.
And
That's
she's
that's
right.
I think that's the heart of it right there. Well, let me just
Mhm.
quickly jump over to Donna. Now, Donna, you didn't grow up in that kind of a family, but
No.
you knew how to cook. So what's your sort of origin story?
So my mother was a wonderful home cook, although she claimed that when she got married, she didn't know how to cook. But my father, who grew up in a very poor family, was grateful for everything she put on the table. And so there was a nice synergy between them of whatever disasters she had. He didn't care, he appreciated them. But by the time I was aware, all I ever saw were nice, ordinary meals on the table, a
Mm,
lot of meat and potatoes. We ate very little rice and only occasionally noodles. It was a real 50s kind of kitchen. But my mother liked to bake. That she seemed to have glommed onto pretty
I see.
quickly.
Yeah.
And that's the interest I followed.
So where
And
did
I
this Linzer
started
torte come
baking in
in?
my mid-teens. Pardon?
Where'd the Linzer torte come in? Since that sort of was like that obviously grabs
Well,
Steve's
it's
attention.
certainly not from the Jewish heritage, but when I went to Madison, in my first year in Madison, I lived in this building with all international students. Don't quite know how that worked out, but
Yeah.
some of these people are still my friends.
Yeah.
And my apartment mate was German. Another friend in the building was Austrian. And between the two of them, I picked up a number of their recipes, and the Linzer torte was one of them. And for a few years there, I made a lot of Linzer torte, and Steve was always my most appreciative customer. He loved it.
That's how
Um,
friendships are born. Yeah.
it truly, but I
Yeah.
haven't, I for age and health reasons, there's less baking going on there used to be.
Yeah.
But during COVID, when I had just retired and I was gonna go stir crazy in the house, I I've always been a fan of the Great British Baking Show. So I bought a Mary Berry cookbook and a
Uh-huh.
Paul Hollywood cookbook,
Yeah.
and I just made stuff and gave it away to friends, which
Nice.
was also an opportunity to see them a little bit during a time where we couldn't really visit.
But
Hey,
you both
Peter.
share this passion for digging into the roots of it, the heritage of
Always.
these recipes, and that seems to be the a common bond that you both have.
Peter, can I build
If you're
on?
a history major, well, dare I say, it's your bread and butter. You just love that part of understanding what you're making.
Peter, let me
Yeah.
just add to what you both are referring to, because I want to make sure listeners appreciate your original question, which is what's different about Jewish rye bread. Most people I share the rye bread with who love it, they recognize that there's a particular bite to the taste, which
Uh-huh.
comes from the sour. Um, and they'll say, they grew up in New York or something like that. Oh, it's even got the bite, or they like the crust, or you've seen the way. And the picture behind me is one of the breads. And by the way, the ones I grew up with were not scored. There you go. You
Yeah.
took a bite out of it.
I took
Yeah.
well as soon as you said the particular bite, I wanted to have a bite.
So
The
how
loaf
is
that
it?
the loaf that I have is not scored, and it's the same loaf behind you, but without the cut marks.
Well, what
Well,
do you think of the
that's
bread?
what I want to talk about that. But finish what you were
Okay,
saying,
well, quickly.
and I'll comment on that.
Okay, here's what I say, and I've never read this anywhere either. Jewish rye bread is different because the ingredients together form the flavor. It's a blend. of different things. And you have to be willing and interested in taking the time to build those layers of flavor and then give them a chance to come together in a way that only someone like you, Peter, as a bread expert, could really explain how that happens. For example, I don't really like sourdough bread, and I never made any of it before. But trust me, I'm now a specialist in making this sour, right?
Yep.
And I've adapted Maurizio Leo's approach to making a small starter so there's not so much waste when I have to refresh it.
Right.
I think lately I've made, more discard loaves than I've made more rye loaves. You know what I mean?
Discard, right? I use my discard to make like waffles and pancakes and things like that.
Right.
But yeah, not my sourdough starter. None of
So,
it goes
so
to
this,
waste, even when it's over the hill.
so this blending, I really think is different. So getting the combination of the wheat flours and the rye flours correct, getting the
Yeah.
percentages right. Honestly, I think if central milling had not helped me, I would have never been able to do
Well,
this.
well, for those people now who are listening who are like us, are real bread geeks and want to know the details. So, what percentage of this loaf, this loaf that you call rye Katz has soul? What?
That's right.
Yeah, Katz Rye was it Katz Rye has soul printed on the bag. Not that you're selling these, but you print it on the bags when you give these loaves away. Um, what is what percentage is wheat and what percentage is rye? And then I know you've got two kinds of rye in here as well. So what are the percentages? Because I think maybe that's one of the defining characteristics
Yeah, I think
of
short of
of
giving
of
the
this
recipe,
style of rye.
right, short of giving the recipe away. Um, well, hang on. I'm going to step away and maybe Jeff can edit this back out later.
And then after we talk about it, I'm going to read what you and Donna have come up with
Okay.
as sort of as a description of this loaf, because you've already done a very good job of putting words to the experience.
Well, we put our heads together and wrote something. So,
But I was just curious because I think that what we think of as rye bread in this country is very different from the way
right,
people say in Germany or Russia think of rye bread, which is tends to be more rye
Dark
dominant,
rye.
whereas
right.
American rye tends to be more wheat dominant, with just enough rye there to let you know that it's not
Okay.
all wheat.
Well, I'll tell you what I came up with, and I'll also tell you what my percentage is on the sour starter. So, because there's all sorts of views on stuff. And let me just again say something I've said to you before. In our society, you really don't get the full breadth of rye breads. Um, Cynthia Clampett, who's a Chicago culinary historian and food writer, just wrote an article for a magazine there in which she wrote about the production of all these Lithuanian, Polish, and other European rye breads that are still popular and sold in Chicago. I think I sent you that article, Peter, right?
Yeah. Yep, you
So,
did.
yeah, it's really worth reading. And it's good to know. When you read the gold medal rye dictionary, they talk about they wrote the thing to promote their rye flours,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
so there's a lot of different rye flours they refer to. Interestingly, I wrote their corporate archivist in the last 2 years while I've been doing this, and I asked them, "Do you have corporate documents that explain the transition away from producing and selling rye bread?" And you know how flour is grown and co-ops and companies, associate with those farms. And she told me they had no such records.
That's
And that
interesting.
was
Yeah.
very disappointing. But I think it's an interesting subject. And I've had Jewish and non-Jewish friends ask me this consistently. They love the flavor and many other things that I have going on. But it's that blend of ingredients and flavors, and then the time that has spent together, not just in the hydration standpoint, but I actually proof mine overnight in the refrigerator. And this is another secret I don't mind giving away. I finish those loaves, I wash them, and I coat them with seeds. There isn't 5 minutes between being out of the fridge and unwrapped and placed in the oven cold. And they come out perfect every time.
So, you've developed this over, through experimental baking and maybe every once in a while running a loaf by Donna and other folks for feedback. Let me read what you
Do you want the
described.
percentages, Peter?
Well, the percentages of what I was really trying to get is how much of the bread is wheat versus rye. Like I think of rye bread can be anywhere from 25% rye to 75% wheat to 50-50 to 40-60. Or it could even be like 100% rye. I've seen it that way, but that's not what we think of.
Jewish rye?
Not as Jewish rye. Yeah.
Yeah.
So would you,
15.5.
I'm sorry, say it again.
The rye in the dough, the rye flour in the dough is 15.5%. The rye flour in the starter is 100%.
Yeah.
And the percentage of starter is between 3 and 4%.
So it's really not, you don't use a lot of starter in the final dough to give it that distinct quality. And
No.
is it your primary leavening, or do you also add yeast in
I
addition
add
to
a
the
little
starter?
yeast, not much, but it's important, even in reading the Rye Dictionary, which is one of the few sources that actually discusses this. They say you can use anywhere. They actually say use 3 to 6% for your starter. But then when you go to their recipes, right, and then you try to adapt it. I also ran this by your colleague Cyril Hitz at Johnson and Wales.
Yeah.
And Cyril said, why don't you try to drop it to 4? And but you got to remember, every time you add something to flour or to bread, to a bread recipe, you're adding something else, because there's water in that sour.
That's right.
So I just found the flavor was still there. And it's not just any sour. I make a specific sour. I don't follow the sours in the Rye Dictionary. They use everything from sour milk to buttermilk to whiskey.
Yeah.
You know this world, right?
Well, and I've never seen that in a recipe book.
I follow the George Greenstein recipe
Uh-huh.
in the book Donna held up, which has caraway seed and minced onion in the first stage of the rye sour.
Interesting.
Doesn't taste like onion.
Right, and it doesn't taste sour either. Your sourdough bread the rye bread that comes out at the end does not taste. You don't notice a sour tone to it, but there's a function for that sour that, at least my understanding of that function for using sour in the bread is that it protects the bread from becoming gummy, because rye has a tendency to there's certain kinds of resins that are in there that will give the bread a gummy quality, or we call it a starch attack, where the enzymes in the bread break down the starches and cause the bread to be gummy tasting, and the sours actually limit that from happening and protect it.
But before you read the vision statement, I don't want readers or people to think, oh, Steve had this idea for a bread and he just kept trying until he got it. That's not how it happened. I really built it around what people had done historically, and to see, and that's why I say again, it's more like Jurassic Park. It's like
right.
Really,
way back.
It's like recreating the woolly mammoth or something.
Right, and that's kind of, I think, part of, for you, in terms of the quest of going back to our original thing.
I'm just glad some woolly Jewish grandmother didn't come out of this thing. but
it's part of what gives you, as I think, it gives you as much joy doing that search and that that hunt for those details as it does to actually make the bread itself. That's sort of the payoff.
I have had shops order it, by the way, or call me for a catering thing, but every one of my loaves takes 2 days.
Yeah.
So
you're doing them in a home oven too. You're not doing them in a bakery. Yeah. So
one day.
let me read this, and then we'll use this and we'll reference this. So what you guys have written is that Katz Rye Has Soul is a homey, beautiful, deep brown, oblong or elliptical or round loaf of Jewish rye bread. The crust envelops a uniquely recognizable, almost too good to eat loaf that is shiny and supple. It greets you with a distinct aromatic embrace when you hold the loaf up close. When the rye bread is sliced, a deep, complex smell explodes outward. The rye bread has a medium crumb that is consistent from end to end and is not too soft nor overly firm or dry. It is ready to eat plain, toasted, topped, and of course, as a sandwich. Well, that's a beautiful description, and I'm holding up the slice that I bit into, and yes, the crumb of the bread is evenly holed. It's not large, irregular holes like we're seeing with French breads and things like that. It's very even hole, and there's caraway seeds in this bread, which is a choice that you made. But you said also that like in the starter, there's onion and there's other things that are going on that are very, very subtle. None of them, other than the caraway seeds, nothing really jumps out at you as a very distinct flavor, add-in. But it is a big part of this flavor profile. Can you talk a little bit about, and let me, before I ask you this, there is a great bite. There is that explosive bite when you bite into it and chew it. It's complex. The flavors change in your mouth as you chew it. I'm describing what happens to me when I chew it. The flavors are changing in my mouth, and after I swallow it, there's a loyalty factor. In other words, I eat it now, but I'm enjoying it 5 minutes from now because the flavors and the aromatics are still kind of expressing themselves in my palate. All that's going on for me when I do it. But let me ask you, why specifically caraway? Because most people do associate Jewish rye bread with caraway seeds. Is there a reason, historical reason or a functional reason for that?
Well, Donna may have an answer. I did some research into, I didn't find specifically when they started using it, but the breads, because rye flour was grown from certain northern climes, caraway actually as well. So in researching this, I actually did try to, actually emailed, I found that it's grown in Finland and Canada and parts of the US, but also Lithuania, which is where my dad's ancestors came from. And I know the regions, so I was kind of curious, even though the Holocaust, interrupted everything.
Uh-huh.
So I found this company called Baltic Caraway in Lithuania, and I started an email discussion with them. Well, here's where my family was from. Where are your farms? And they're kind of, like these grain companies, milling companies, where they have contracts with all these farms, like a co-op. And I go, oh, we have, we're growing caraway right near those towns. And then I decided, okay, well, that's kind of close enough, but I was interested in where it's grown. I'm also very interested in how climate change is affecting all of this. Is climate change one of the reasons that we might not see rye bread so much in the future? I mean, you don't grow it in the deep south, you grow it in the northern climes.
That's true. So as this recipe was coming, Donna, as you were giving him feedback, what were some of the things you noted that were guiding the process along?
Well, from the time I got my first taste, I spent a lot of time carrying on about the aroma, which just I found overwhelming.
In a good way.
In a wonderful way. I mean, I've teased Steve that he should develop a perfume that, like Jewish cooks can spray in their house and smell of rye bread.
That is a great idea.
But I think what stood out to me is because really every step had been so carefully researched and carefully developed and then tweaked and refined, was that the bread was evoking so many different memories. So I think someone who didn't grow up with Jewish rye would simply say, this is a lovely bread.
Right.
But if you grew up with this, the fact is the crust is lovely and it's probably better than anything I ever grew up with because they were commercial breads. You have to do things a certain way, but the whole texture of the bread, and then the smell.
Yeah.
That I was just transported to a different world, and that evoking of memory became such a major factor in my enjoyment of the bread, which is good no matter how you look at it, because
Right.
my husband and my son both had it and loved it, and they didn't grow up with this bread the way I did with
Well, I
rye
think
bread.
this notion of being transported and having, kind of touching into this taste memory that you had, and this loaf, whether it's the identical loaf you had or better than, or whatever it is, something about this loaf, and it sounds like a lot of it had to do with the aromaticity of the bread, brought you back to another time in your life and caused you to say, this is the loaf I've been longing for the last 45
Totally.
years. Yeah.
And it's just, and the other thing I think that happens with Steve's bread is that for people like me who bite into it and go, oh, goodness, they don't want to share.
Yeah.
You eat something else. I'll eat the rye.
Yeah, just leave that with me.
I'll take
Well,
care of it.
well, it's been,
I've heard that from other people.
it's really terrific, and I know that Steve, one of the reasons why I wanted you to come on the show today is to talk about sort of this pursuit, and we call it a quest that has driven you, that's connected to all other parts of your life, and it's only really been the last 3 years or so that you've been working on this particular
Actually,
loaf of bread.
just two. Yeah.
But you've taken that same intensity and passion, but ultimately I think it's that longing to connect with something that takes us back to another time in our life, you know to our own origin stories that drove you. That I found it to be really fascinating. The loaf itself is wonderful. You mentioned that it's not. I think it says here in your description that it's not a medium crumb, that is consistent from end to end, not too soft nor overly firm. And that's again, I think a distinguishing characteristic. It's not super soft, but it's not firm like a lot of rye breads, and a lot of rye breads that we buy, that especially sort of old world style, are drier and denser. It's a balance. You found a balance that amidst the hundreds of different types of rye breads, this is one that seems to touch the most nerves, mainly not necessarily because it's the greatest rye bread in the history of the world, but because it's the greatest rye bread in the history of our lives, from our youth. And I found that to be pretty exciting, and parallels so much the quest that I think drives people on the Pizza Quest journey. And we love to have people on the show that are on quests, whether it's related to pizza or not, because the universals of the quest is pretty much the same. There's something driving us, burning in our bellies, that we're in pursuit of. And I think it's this connection with something that's deep inside that goes back to our youth. Does that make sense to you guys?
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. I would say the one thing that Donna and I also have in common, and Peter, you demonstrate to the nth degree, you have to like the work. It's work to do this. I don't want people to think, oh, you just whip this up. I've done a lot of food writing, and I've done other deep dives. I basically recreated the baked German apple pancake from the original Pancake House. Now, frankly, once I got more deeply into it and appreciated the fact, that they don't make batter for one pancake, right?
Right.
And they don't use the same kind of ovens that we use, and they've done things a little bit more, specifically and professionally. But I published that recipe in the Chicago Tribune in 2008, And it was really because I happened to be in one of their franchise restaurants. I happened to grow up with one in Chicago as well. And, um, I started, frankly, talking with the manager. He didn't know I was a food writer. And next thing I knew, he walked me into the kitchen.
Nice,
Here, I'll
nice.
show you. And I noticed some things, went out to my car. I called Carol Haddix, who was the Chicago Tribune food editor.
Right.
And she said, "Can you do it?" And I said, "I can try." Of course, that was, months and months in the making, but I struck up a friendship with one of the family members of the original Pancake House in Portland. And they also had some questions about something. So I used the historical research background that Don and I have referenced. They told me that the founder of the original Pancake House had given an interview for Ford Times magazine. The Ford Motor Company had a small, almost brochure type magazine. It used to have these watercolor drawings of, it wanted people to get in their cars and go to inns and taverns and eat. So they started featuring these, and they would have these beautiful watercolor drawings and then a recipe from the restaurant. And sometime in the 40s or something, they featured the original Pancake House. And the family asked me, maybe you can help us find it. And having a history degree, I called the Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, and asked for the archivist, somebody like Donna, and asked them what they charged for their research fee. They found the darn thing. I mean, talk about a needle in a haystack.
Yeah, yeah.
Then they sent me a photocopy of the page. And then I went on eBay and I actually found copies of the actual Ford Times magazine. And I bought one and I sent it to them. Well, they were very helpful after that. Without, they still weren't going to give me the recipe.
Well, and then you had to put all the pieces together, which is, again, part of your, I think you get enough joy. As you said, you have to be willing to do the work, but you get joy from this particular kind of work.
I made more of those apple pancakes. I used to wake my daughter Nina up like at 1 a.m. Honey, you got to taste this one.
Well, I know, and anybody who's ever had the we call the Dutch apple pancakes, from the original Pancake House, knows how great they are. It's like a baked
That's
pancake.
What we're talking. Mine is close. It isn't theirs.
But it's an incredible pancake. And once you have it, it is. I found it to be actually a life-changing experience the first time I had one. We had I had it in Boston.
That's why we pursue these other recipes.
Yeah, exactly.
We know they're life-changing, like Donna has said.
Well, Steve Katz, Donna Webber, I want to thank both of you for being with us, sharing your journey. I'm so glad that your friendship that started over 49 years ago in Madison, Wisconsin persists, and that you're continuing to support each other's never-ending quest for this connection. I think the key word out of today's show for me is connection. That you guys are connected. You've reconnected, but you're connecting to something that goes back, deep inside of each one of us. And I think that's at the heart of why I always say, the Pizza Quest is more about the quest than it is about pizza, and the quest never ends. And you're the perfect personifications of this never-ending quest. So thanks so much for sharing your stories with everyone today. And
Thank you.
I'm going to, I think, break away after we finish, make myself a pastrami sandwich on this rye bread of yours, this rye with soul. And then probably tomorrow morning, I'm going to have to run out to our local original Pancake House and get one of those Dutch apple pancakes, because you got me thinking about it now.
I wish I could join you.
Yeah. Well, in spirit, we all will. And
again, bread.
Thank you both for being with us, and thank all of you for joining us today on Pizza Quest. Please join us again on the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.
Shopify's point of sale system helps you sell at every stage of your business. Need a fast and secure way to take payments in person? We've got you covered. How about card readers you can rely on anywhere you sell?
Thanks. Have a good one.
Yep, that too. Want one place to manage all your online and in-person sales? That's kind of our thing. Wherever you sell, businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 a month trial at shopify.com/listen. Shopify.com/listen.